Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to England once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. So the last beer that I had from this brewery was really quite nice. It was a style that I very much enjoy, and a sub-style that's one of my favourites, I would say, but it's not a style that this brewery is really well known for. The beer that we're going to have a look at today is one of this brewery's latest releases. It is the style that they're very well known for, and it was also a pick of one of my local beer dealers here in central Scotland. He's always pointed me in the direction of some really interesting stuff. So needless to say, I'm very, very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head down to the county of Sussex in the very southeast of England. We're going to go to a little place called Lewes, which is just a little bit inland from the south coast, almost directly to the south of London, and that means that we're going to have a look at yet another beer from Beak Brewery. So this particular beer is called Pig. It comes in at 8% ABV, and this is a New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. So yeah, I've been meaning to try one of the IPAs from Beak for quite a while because I've heard that these guys are very, very good in this particular style category, but I just never came across any of their stuff particularly fresh. I have seen the IPAs in Copenhagen, but at that point they had been sitting for about 2 months or something like that, and I really wanted to get a hold of something that was pretty fresh, and this was the opportunity to do it. So yeah, this one was picked for me by Colin of the Caledonian Craft Beer Merchant in Dunfermline. He had quite a few different Beak beers, but I basically just asked him which one was his favourite and went with that, because he's always shown me some good stuff. So yeah, I'll put the link to the Caledonian Craft Beer Merchant for you in the description below, and you can check those guys out and see if they have anything interesting, which they usually do. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see how it got on. My very first IPA from Beak Brewery in Lewes, Sussex in England. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Beak Brewery before, and we will see about adding more to that list at some point in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated, and remember, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. So just go in there, use the little search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, whatever you like. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the English playlist along with a number of other things. And you can, of course, check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well, and there are some really interesting beers that I've reviewed in there. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a wee bit about Beak Brewery once again. So, as I mentioned to you already, Beak Brewery are based in the little town of Lewes in Sussex in the very southeast of England, and the company was founded by Daniel Tapper, who has a long background in food and drink journalism, which goes back to 2007, and he was notably a writer with The Guardian. But he is from Leeds originally, up in Yorkshire, and he got into drinking bitter through his grandfather, and he would go around and try different cask ales with his friends. But he took up brewing as a hobby during his spare time, and it just kind of grew from there. But he originally founded Beak Brewery as a nomadic brewing project, and they've brewed beer at North Brewing and Northern Monk in Leeds, Beavertown and Partisan in London, and also at Burning Sky in Firley in East Sussex. But the first beer was produced in 2016, and they continued to brew as nomads until the summer of 2020. But it was while brewing at Burning Sky that Daniel met Robin Head Furman, who he recruited as his main brewer for Beak, and he's actually a graduate of the Heriot Watt Brewing and Distilling Programme in Edinburgh. But they found a new home in the Cliff Industrial Estate in Lewes in East Sussex. Apparently they'd signed a 10-year lease on the premises just before lockdown in England started, and this was a bit of a kind of shock to the system, but they have gone on and been really quite successful. But at the brewery, they've got a 15 BBL brew kit, which is around 2,400 litres, and they started off with 3 2,000 litre fermenters. They've also got an on-site tap room, which opened in 2021, and if I remember rightly, they were doing different food trucks and things at the brewery as well, so I'll need to go down there at some stage. and have a little look and visit the Beak Brewery and do a wee out and about video. That could be really quite interesting, but I'm not sure when I'll be in London or the southeast of England again. We'll just need to see what happens. But these guys have become very well known for their New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs. They've been very, very successful and very recognised actually in this particular style category, and as of August 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced about 110 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. But yeah, that's everything I can really tell you about Beak Brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's go on then and actually have a little look at the beer itself. So I'll just let you have a wee look at the artwork on this one before we open up. You can see it is pretty simple, as is the case with a number of the Beak beers actually, but there you can see the pig is just kind of chilling there and looking kind of cool, but you can see this little guy on the back here, who you'll see on a number of the Beak Brewery beers. But yeah, plain silver top on the can there. It's a 440ml can, and it tells you on the side here, this beer does not contain mango, nor was it brewed with pot, strawberries, blueberries, pink grapefruit or spongy pine forest floors. But yeah, has the ingredients underneath, just malted barley, wheat, oats, hops and yeast. But yeah, I think this one is really nicely presented. You always get this with the Beak beers, but I have to say I am very curious to try my first IPA from Beak. I don't think I've even had a sip of one, to be honest with you, when I think about it. But yeah, let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. The Pig, an 8% New England Hazy Imperial Double IPA from Beak Brewery in England. Let's get this started. So, we should be nice. This looks very nice actually. So I think for the moment that will be enough to just have a little look at the beer and talk about the appearance and things like that, and then we'll put the rest in just before we taste it. But I have to say this looks very, very nice. So we've maybe got about 75% of the beer out and into the glass at the moment, but it looks absolutely great. So before the head disappears, you can see that the beer poured with somewhere between a quarter and a 1/3 finger. That's just faded away to be it is fading away to be a very nice kind of thin foamy layer, but there's a thicker ring around the edge of the glass there. But you can see the bubbles sitting on the surface are kind of medium in size, and it gets a little bit foamier the further up that you go. But colour-wise, I have to say, this is one of the paler New England doubles that I've come across in recent times. It has a little bit of a kind of pineapple juice type colour to it, I have to say. Papaya juice maybe as well. I always like comparing the colours in New England IPAs to different fruit juices, because that's really just what they remind me of. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few different things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging that you do or adjuncts that you put into the beer will affect its colour too, but you don't often have to care about that when those last two variables in particular with IPAs, generally speaking. But yeah, this one I have to say is pretty damn soupy and gloopy. It's one of the soupiest and gloopiest New England doubles I think I maybe have ever come across on the channel. So remember, the level of haze in these beers depends on the oat content, the wheat content, and to a degree what yeast you use as well. But yeah, it can vary from brewery to brewery and recipe to recipe, as this one kind of highlights. This is, it's not the heaviest New England IPA I've come across by any stretch of the imagination, but this is certainly one of the soupiest and gloopiest looking ones that I remember. Not too much in the way of visible carbonation with this beer, just one or two little bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, and you can see a few just going up toward the surface of the liquid there. But overall, it does look very, very nice. Yeah, I don't know if we really need to say anything else about the appearance of this beer. Let's have a wee look at the aroma and just see what this is going to have in store for us. I'm really curious about this, as I've said, but nothing untoward about this beer in terms of its appearance when you consider what style it is. But let's do this. Really quite nice, actually. Very soft, juicy, and kind of oaty and wheaty leaning New England IPA, I would say. But beautiful aroma. I think this is going to be really nice to drink, actually. Feels like a wee while since I drank a New England IPA. I've been drinking more kind of bigger malty things since I've been here in Scotland. But yeah, always good to change it up. But yeah, as I've said to you many a time before, when it comes to IPAs, and New England IPAs, for me there are 6 different elements to think about with this particular style. So you can have the sort of farmhousey and yeasty type character. You also get the rye leaning grainy side of things. Those 2 elements are a little bit more prominent in American brewed New England IPAs, but then you've got the barley malt bread, the wheaty bitiness, the oaty creaminess, and also the sweeter side of things too. And that's just the way the European brewed New England IPAs have kind of evolved in my experience. You've got the likes of the Hill Farmsteads and the Alchemist ones from the States, which are the old school, you know, what this style was like back in the day. But then the European New England IPAs tend to be based a little bit more on the kind of wheater heavy Trilliums and the more oat heavy Treehouses actually. But yeah, this one strikes me as having a little bit of wheat and a little bit of oat, just on a little look at the aroma. But it smells really nice. It gives you everything you'd want from the style. But yeah, let's have a wee look at the aroma a bit more in depth and just break it down for you. So yeah, the backbone of this beer, absolutely, you've got a little bit of that kind of typical fresh white bready bread crust. You know, it's got a little bit of that almost like, you know, it's got a little bit of that almost kind of floury character to it. You know, fresh flour straight out the bakery type bread crust there. There is a wee teeny little hint of woodiness in this one, and it gets more and more actually the longer that you smell the beer. You get more and more woodiness out of it, but above the kind of fresh white bread crust and the wood, you get a little bit of a kind of Jacob's cream cracker type note coming out of it, which is great. So yeah, aroma wise, I would say that the malty base is really quite nice and smooth actually. So yeah, you've got that fresh white bready bread crust in there. On top of that, there's a little bit of a more, you do get a little bit of a kind of wholemeal brown bready type character coming out of the beer, and then above that, you do get a nice kind of fluffier white bread out of this one. So yeah, the wholemeal brown bread really takes a back seat to the white bread, I would say, and the white bread is nice and light and airy. Above that, you have above the white bready type character, you've got a little bit, you do get that more dense white bready character from the wheat. And the wheat actually has a little bit of zip to it in this one, which I find really interesting. Yeah, and you get a little bit of the wheaty bitiness at the back of the nose too. So yeah, the bready layer, like you've got wholemeal brown bread, fluffy white bread from the barley malt, more dense and slightly spicy. Don't know if zippy, I think is the better word for it. You are getting some of that kind of stronger wheaty character out of this one. But then there's also a nice little bit of oaty character in this beer too. And the oats are interesting. As I've always said, with New England's, oats can generally be used as a kind of rough guide on how fresh your New England IPA is. The creamier the oats smell and taste, the younger the beer is, the drier they smell and taste, the older the beer is. This is something that you need to be aware of with this style, I think. So for me, you've got a nice kind of creamy character coming out of the oats, a little tiny touch of dryness, not very much. But yeah, the more that you smell of this one, the wheat becomes a bit more prominent, and the oats just kind of sit back a little bit. The thing I would say about this beer too, as well, is that the malty base isn't overly sweet. You do get a little bit of a kind of Werther's original butter candy, butterscotchy sort of thing there in the middle of the nose, but really not all that much actually. So yeah, the white bready character coming out of this one It just sits there, and then yeah, you get that little bit of sweetness on the top, which is good. I mean, at 8% ABV, you would expect a little bit of booziness to come out of the beer, and with this one you can tell from the aroma that it is that little bit stronger. But yeah, a little bit more sweetness coming out of this one the more that you smell of it, and I think that's great. So, yeah, lovely stuff, I have to say. So, I think that's everything we need to say about the malty side of the beer then. So let's have a wee look at the green component in this one. And what I would say is that generally speaking, the green component in this beer is really quite bright. So you have to remember that with IPAs there are 3 different kinds of hoppings that you can do. You can do early addition hopping, which generally speaking, if we use a 90-minute wort boil as our model, it will happen within the first hour of the wort boil. That gives you mainly bitterness in the flavour and a deeper and danker aroma. You've got late addition hopping, which takes place within the last half hour of the wort boil. That's going to give you quite a bright floral green component, and that's also going to come out in the flavour as well. But then you've also got dry hopping, which takes place after the wort boil is complete, and that's going to give you completely flavour and aroma, and yeah, it's going to give you a very bright sort of flavour and aroma as well. So yeah, these are the 3 different types of hoppings that you can use. New England IPAs tend to rely on late addition and dry hopping almost exclusively, but West Coast IPAs use all 3, which is why they have that deeper, danker aroma and that more kind of bitter taste. So that gives you an idea. But in terms of the green component in this beer, for me there's a little touch of earthiness to it. So yeah, a little touch of earthiness in there, but really quite minimal. Very bright and quite zesty floral character to the beer too. The floral notes in this one are very nice, actually. Kind of quite wet, but at the same time really very bright. Then you've got this lovely kind of wet, almost leafy, grassy, zesty character coming out of the beer. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is really very, very nice. So gets a big thumbs up from me in that sense. The green component's great on this one. So yeah, I think we can round off the aroma with a wee look at the fruity characteristics of the beer. So for me, it is a very kind of tropical leaning New England IPA. I wouldn't be surprised if this is, you know, something along the lines of like Galaxy, Citra, Idaho 7, something like that. Victoria's Secret would be the other one. It's one of these hops, I think, that's been used in here. Potentially El Dorado would be another option, but yeah, it's really tropical leaning. You've got a wee bit of the citrusy note too, but for the fruity side of things, I would say you've got a lovely big kind of passion fruity note out of this one. You have got a big juicy mango character. Underneath that there's a little bit of apricot-y note and a wee bit of pineapple. It's the kind of softer fruits in this one that make me wonder about Idaho 7. But yeah, big juicy passion fruit, like soft juicy mango as well, and then yeah, drier apricot, a little bit of pineapple, and then yeah, you've got all these other things going on with it as well. It's got a little bit of a slightly lemon-limey character at the front of the nose, maybe a bit of juicy lime, but yeah, mainly this is a kind of tropical leaning New England IPA for me. They were saying, oh no, it wasn't brewed with strawberry. I mean, if they're going to use strawberry, it's going to be Strata that would be the hop you would use to get that. And having smelt this one, yeah, you do get a little touch of that at the front of the nose too. So Strata might well have been one that's been used in this. But this is the funny thing with hops. They kind of go in and out of fashion, if you like, and it depends on what country the beer comes from too. Hops that are popular in one country one year can be popular in a different country the next year, and vice versa. Just crazy. But aroma wise, yeah, I can see why they were saying on the side maybe there'd be a little bit of strawberry in this one. So Strata, could see that in this beer. Enigma would be the other option, because you do get a little bit of that soft red curranty note out of it too. So yeah, very tropical leaning this one, I would say, but certainly potentially a little bit of a red fruity character, as they were kind of suggesting in a strange way on the side of the can. But yeah, let's get the rest of this beer out into the glass and see what it's all about. But as I always say, take a little bit of time to just enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But this one is the Pig, a double IPA at 8% ABV from Beak Brewery in Lewes in Sussex in the south east of England. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, Skål, cheers, my very first taste of an IPA from Beak Brewery. Let's do this. Yeah, that's pretty damn good. I will say, this one deviates quite a little bit from what I was expecting based on the aroma. The first impression that I have from the flavour of this one is that it's a big, smooth, oaty, creamy thing. Green components nowhere near as kind of punchy as I was expecting, but it does have the tropical fruit notes to it there, the very soft, tropically fruity character. It's great, it smells really, really nice. So, I'm going to say straight away, I can see if Beak's IPAs are like this, you can see why they've become such a well-respected brewery in this particular style category. This is really, really well done. But yeah, beer gives you everything you want. Very smooth and creamy example of the style, but it's great. It really is very, very nice, this one, so it gets a big thumbs up from me. Yeah, let's just break the beer down and describe the flavour a bit more in depth, as we always do. Middle third of your palate. So you can feel the backbone of the beer. You've got that lovely kind of fresh, white bready bread crust there, forming the absolute backbone of the beer. It's got a wee bit of that kind of fresh sort of flour quality that you get, you know, from a fresh roll straight out of the bakery. Further forward on that middle third of your palate, you get a tiny little bit of wood, but I'd say it's quite minimal in this beer's case. Do we get a bit of cracker in the malt base? Let's see. Not really in this one. This is kind of interesting. So above the kind of bread crusty backbone in this beer, there is a slight layer of a slightly, there's a layer of a slightly kind of sweeter, more wholemeal type brown bread in this one, and it's quite a wet bready character as well, I would add. So you have a little bit of a wet kind of wholemeal bready character in there. On top of that, you have more of a, yeah, on top of that, you've got a little bit more of a kind of, you've got the more kind of, you've got a more light and airy white bread, and the white bready character in this one does actually carry a slight degree of sweetness, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you don't have that kind of drier, crackery layer out of this beer. It's the malt base in this one's a bit denser and a bit more bready, and it has a little bit more kind of sweetness to it, which is good. So yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is really quite interesting. It's very smooth. This is one of the smoother malt bases I've come across in this style for quite a wee while. But I do like that. Above that nice kind of white bready layer, you can feel there's an even denser layer of white bread, which is obviously the wheat coming out of the beer. And the further you go into the aftertaste with that, you do get a little bit of zip from the wheaty side of things. But yeah, not too much. Like I said, I was expecting a bit more of a kind of fight between the oats and the wheat for centre stage in this beer, but it really does lean more toward the oats the more that you drink of the beer. But then yeah, above all of that, you have some really nice kind of, you just get that, you get the smooth wheat, and then you start to get all the oats out of this one, and it's kind of, as you go down the middle line of your tongue, you can feel the really creamy, dense part of the oats, and as you move out toward the edges of your palate, the oats are still creamy, but they dry up very, very slightly and just give you that little bit more kind of sweetness out of the beer. But the malty side of this one is quite dense in comparison to some others I've had, and that would maybe go away to explaining how soupy and gloopy this beer is, but it's nice. Yeah, above that kind of oaty layer then, you can feel there's a little bit of you do get a little touch of a kind of sweet circle in the middle of your palate there, and it's got a little bit of a kind of Werther's Original sort of thing, and also a wee bit of, you've got a little bit of a Werther's Original type quality in there, and you've also got a wee touch of like McVitie's Digestive Biscuit. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together from that particular perspective is really nice. You just get a little bit, you can feel the Werther's Original kind of note in the very dead centre of your palate, which is obviously covering the alcohol, pardon me, and then as you go out toward the edge of that middle third of your palate, it's a bit more about the biscuit. But yeah, at that point I think we've covered everything that's going on in the middle third of your palate. So we'll move on to the back third of the palate. As I often say, the back third of your palate is going to give you similar flavours, just at different intensities, but do remember that general trend with your palate, that sweeter flavours will come out further forward, more dry and bitter flavours will come out further back on the palate. So yeah. Yeah, for me, the border region between middle and back third of your palate is kind of what you'd expect. You get a nice little bit of a kind of more dense white bready build up in the base, and it's quite sweet actually, but then as you move further up from that, you get a bit of a lighter and drier white bready character coming out of this one, and that's great. I do like how that pieces together in this one. So the base of that back third of your palate, you've got a really nice kind of fresh white bready bread crust coming out of this one. On top of that, you get a little bit of cracker. You do get a little bit of that in the back third of your palate. You can feel there is a kind of more wholemeal brown bready layer there, which feels a little bit wet, but it actually has a little bit more kind of dryness, but at the same time sweetness to it. Then you can feel the fluffier white bready layer sitting on top of that, which again feels a little bit lighter and more airy, and then you get the really dense sweety character sitting on top of everything else on that back third of your palate, and you can feel it has a little bit more bitiness to it, but it's also a little bit drier and smooth at the same time. So that's really interesting how all of these flavours come out on the back third of your palate, but above everything else you have the more you have the kind of yeasty flavours coming out of the beer too. So let's just focus on the kind of yeasty component of this beer and see what it's all about. So, yeasty side of the beer, for me, it's kind of what you'd expect, to be honest. You get this more dense, like very sweet, almost brown bready type character coming out of it. So you can feel that above everything else. It's a more dense brown bready note there. On top of that, you've got a sweeter white bread. You've got a little bit of a kind of McVitie's Digestive biscuity sort of thing wrapping itself around it. Maybe a little bit of honeycomb. I always get a wee touch of honeycomb on the back third of the palate with the more yeasty side of things, I have to say. So yeah, I think that the yeasty side of this beer is quite interesting. So yeah, more dense brown bready character, a little bit of white bread sweetness in there, and then it's kind of wrapped in a sort of honeycomb McVitie's Digestive biscuity sort of thing. So yeah, I think that goes together really well. But yeah, the back third of your palate, you can feel the flavour is definitely taller, and then as you move further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. So yeah, I like that about this one. It's a big thumbs up from me. That's the malty and yeasty side of the beer covered. So let's have a wee look at the green component then. So the green component for me is actually very smooth in this one. I wouldn't be surprised if this beer is using a little bit of like cryo oil or something like that. But yeah, back corners of the palate then. Yeah, you are getting a little bit of earthiness in there. But as you move further forward, you can feel the green component is really oily in this one, and you start to get a little touch of herbal character, but then it very quickly becomes a bit more of a sort of oily and floral kind of affair. So yeah, the way that the beer goes together in that particular regard is really quite interesting, and it gets a thumbs up from me. But yeah, round the front curve of the tongue, you've got a wee bit of a lighter, grassier and more zesty type quality coming out of it. And yeah, I do like that about this one. But yeah, nice little bit of earthiness in there, a little bit of herbal character, then an oily floral note, and round the front curve of the tongue, it's quite oily, but a little bit wetter and more leafy at the same time, but that's where the grassy notes are coming out of the beer. So, yeah, I like that about this one. The green component is quite nice, and it's very in keeping with the sort of smoother, oaty type vibe that you get from this beer. But let's round off the tasting section then with a wee look at the front third of your palate. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you can feel there's a nice little bit of bready build up in there. You've got a sweeter kind of wholemeal brown bready character in the base, but then a softer white bread character above. In the base of that front third of your palate, yeah, the bread crust, a little bit of wholemeal bread, and then a slightly more dense white bready character. Then you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters are just rolling their way out of the beer. So let's focus on those. So, for me, the fruity side of the beer, at the back of that front third of your palate, you've got a wee bit of a more kind of, you've got a little bit of a more kind of pungent passion fruity type note out of this one. I wouldn't go as far as saying grapefruit, I would say more pungent passion fruit, but then it mellows out very quickly as you come further forward, and you get a really quite ripe and juicy mango type quality to this one. So yeah, a little bit of passion fruit, a little bit of a kind of riper, juicy mango there, and then as you move further forward into the centre of that front third of your palate, you can feel there's a little bit of apricot underneath. There's a wee bit, yeah, a little bit of apricot underneath. There's a wee bit of a kind of really ripe mango, almost like guava, in that middle part of the front third of your palate. Then above that there's a bit of an oily kind of pineapple, and then as you move into the front half of that front third of your tongue, it's quite interesting because it becomes a little bit more distinctively citric and zesty, but I do get a little bit of that oily strawberry, which makes me wonder about strata. And what I'm seeing as being very pungent passion fruit, it could well be pink grapefruit. I remember that strata gives you this kind of strawberry and pink grapefruit sort of thing. So the more that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that strata has been used in this one. Yeah. I've got a feeling that this beer could be something like Strata and Victoria's Secret, or Strata and Idaho 7. But as I say, lots of ripe, juicy mango, apricot underneath, juicy pineapple. But as you move into the front half of that front third of your tongue, quite a little bit of a sharper, lemony, limey note, a little bit of strawberry, as I've said, and yeah, I think that's quite interesting. So yeah, a very quirky beer, this one, I have to say. I do like that about it, but quite a creamy New England IPA, and it becomes more and more oily the more that you drink of it. On this note, I think we can round off the review with just a little look at the mouthfeel. So, mouthfeel wise, I would say this one is certainly at the kind of top end of mid-bodied range of the spectrum. Carbonation is very, very smooth. It's creamy, but at the same time it's quite oily, I would say. In terms of its IBU count, I think it's like 30, 35 IBUs. It doesn't strike me as being overly bitter, and with New England double IPAs they tend to put the bitterness up a wee bit to say 40 or something, but I don't think it's, this one feels quite low in its bitterness, so I would potentially stick with 30 IBUs for this. But the malt base, as we said, has a little bit of dryness underneath. There's a little bit of kind of smoother, slightly sweet and dense character in the middle. You've got a bit of kind of more creaminess on top and a wee bit of sweetness in there. Then the fruity side of things, it's very tropical, this one, but the further you go into the aftertaste, you do get a little bit more of a kind of citrusy zing coming out of it, which I think is really quite interesting. But yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is really very, very nice, and it gets a big thumbs up from me. Yeah, really interesting New England double IPA, this one, and it's certainly given me a good impression of what Beak are doing. So I maybe need to try one or two more of these and see how they turn out, and see if there's any trends I can pick up from Beak, because a lot of beers from New England IPA breweries tend to lean a certain way or whatever. But yeah, this has given a very good impression of Beak's New England IPAs, and we'll explore these a little bit more. But yeah, I think that's everything we really need to say about this one. to be honest with you. Really interesting beer and a very good pick from Colin at the Caledonian Craft Beer Merchant for me to try. So yeah, this was the Pig, an 8% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Beak Brewery in Lewes in Sussex in the southeast of England. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Beak Brewery as well, and we will see about returning to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But in the meantime, check out my social media, check out Beak Brewery's social media, and I'll see you guys in another review very, very shortly. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and see you guys in the next one. Ciao just now.